Is it Zizek's let's vert his last word? So endless nix, this endless knot of his atheism. An atheist and eine, atheist, only an atheist. Or there's a second possibility. Could he have, like Heidegger, a late career Kehre or turn? So certain comments, certain bare awareness in his recent discourse, very recent discussion, have given me slight reason to think that one could agitate and push Zizek in this direction. So, to be clear, I regard Zizek as, in terms of personality, as one of those personalities which, when maxing out their capacity to do some serious research and thinking, are capable of real of contribution to the thinking part of the community, as it were. But nonetheless, so far has a kind of like yeti, or something that is almost suspect of not being quite human, in the sense that in former times the mad were considered to be having regressed to an animal state, something below the state of reason. So there's also possibly some kind of mutations, some kind of ugly mutations into half a thinking, evolved failures at human beings. Evolutionary jumps that went in the tangential direction and therefore failed. And Zizek gives every appearance of being such a specimen. However, this could partially be explained. We can't merely say there's something called genetic fallacy and leave it at that. We always have to be ready to subject to such notions to some kind of fragilise, or some kind of making fragile, some kind of phenomenological gaze, and some kind of ultimate Aragnes appraisal. But just in simple terms, actually I think in ordinary terms, just as one sometimes says follow the money or something like that, one sometimes says all these horrible arguments we're getting for a certain subject matter in the political arena are due to the fact that certain moneyed interests are paying people to produce these arguments, like endless, feedless arguments, endless various arguments for certain subjects. Because it's possible to do that in a liberal society. We have the thing called free speech, and the corporations, especially in America, have been given special consideration on that score. Therefore, we can look at the history of Zizek and say, were there things in his history that caused him to say these things? So maybe there were, and therefore we're guilty of genetic fallacy. I realize that, but nonetheless, maybe good sense makes us think maybe that we should investigate. We should pay attention to this stream of the by metaphor of the money. Who's paying him to think this way? What past is the cause of this? So I think so far as Zizek is Freudian, we can see fairly clearly Freud's main influence is the German promulgator of Darwin, Ernst Haeckel, with his recapitulation theory, which heavily influenced Freud. But that's just that's a total accident. But the main thing is the reception of Darwin in Germany or in Prussia in Freud's day was totally dominated his thinking as a medical man. His whole background is biological. So, of course, we'll be told that Freud is complex and there's beyond the pleasure principle, and that many people will scold us that we're not perfectly in keeping with all these saving clauses that somehow must be made. But nonetheless, this is fundamentally a biological approach to the question of what is reality. And then when you find out there's then you make the epicycles, right? So the biological approach has certain problems. You can't figure out the etiology of some weird behaviors, and then so you eventually come up with this notion of the unconscious and then plug it into Plato's Republic and so on. But nonetheless, it's fundamentally, it starts with a biological approach. So in this sense, if we say Zizek has a lot of founding in kind of like sympathetic connection to Freud and to Lacan and so on. Lacan, who represents himself, I believe, as an Orthodox Freudian, although of course his ideas are very different. But nonetheless, he has a connection to Freud. In any case, he's like somebody who's done an Entwicklish Fähigkeit, and unfolding, a developing of the already existing framework. In this sense, I have a certain hope that Zizek is capable to break free of his first prejudices. So this is always very difficult. So we get things, as Leo Strauss would put it, as mother's milk when we're very young, and when learning some stupid concepts makes us think a feeling of pride, like as though a feeling of superiority, let's put that way, as though we had actually learned something. And therefore, like often 50 years later, people have these same notions, and they're still priding themselves on being able to say them again and again and again, and having known the thing that the barbarians within don't know. That's a generic attack on the issue, but the real attack has to come through showing that one, the biological view is not cogent in itself, and of course that can only, probably the simplest way to do that is by showing the other views. But then one could say Zizek mostly moves in these kind of questions of like, oh, what is the real what is really happening? And then he thinks that physicists can tell us what's really happening. Now here's the rub of it. Zizek's whole approach, when it comes through all these other authors, those other authorities, Haeckel and so on, who have no tie to scientism whatsoever, and come from a different mood, a different time, he usually reverts back to this kind of saying that, nobody can show, for instance, the saying that Dugin has even picked up on recently, I believe, there's nobody can show a vision of anything except like Armageddon, or except like a bad future, the so-called apocalyptic future. Nobody can give a direction forward. But the great error in this is that he doesn't see that he himself already has the millenarist or Millerist view. He already has the belief in salvation. He already thinks that he has the truth in his scientism, in his atheism, in his claim that it's just meaningless, in his devotion to looking at having discussions with Sean Carroll and physicists, which of course I don't in any way proscribe, but I just say if you're doing it because you think you're going to find the truth there, this is a sign that you're already a devotee of kind of an unconscious messianic avenue, which you take for granted is the truth, and then this prevents you from understanding the discoveries that are the most important discoveries for all human beings everywhere on the earth, which have been made by such persons as Count Paul York, by Martin Heidegger and Husserl, by Leo Strauss, who have seen how the most dominant form of human thought, which is intimately linked to nuclear destruction capable of annihilating the earth. Okay, we could say here, true, it will just be the annihilation of the earth. It won't be, in Hindu perspective, this doesn't mean too much. But nonetheless, so far as we are all receptive to this, the weightiness put on the possibility of the end of all things through technological decision, through the human being that's come into the power to do what Nero or Tiberius can never do, which would be, no matter how corrupt they were, to destroy the earth and all its people, and maybe even more than the earth. I don't know. God's a black hole. I don't know. I have all these experiments that are just in their reaching their liminal stages, and we're not sure what they can do. But if that is supposed to be a standard for seriousness, so as in a way Schmidt would admit that by putting so much emphasis on the possibility of physical killing, and the grave contradistinction between the earlier mentality of the Christian martyr, let's say, or the Christian Stylite, who would sit for years at a time eating locusts on a 12-foot platform, or even a Pascal who would mortify his flesh like that. I remember that film, the Church of Christ without Christ. Taken from this perspective, it does seem that these researchers are the ones that are showing the things that are the most important. Okay, but we don't. It's true, we don't have to be lodged in that perspective. But as Westerners, my argument is that we are, so that we all are. Therefore, in some sense, so far the question isn't saying I affirm that. If that were it, that would be the easy out, because quite a few people would say, no, I don't affirm that. I'm against materialism or something like that. But the question is, does it force us to respond to it in such a way that it actually dominates us, and therefore constitutes the essence of our being in a certain sense? So far as that's true, these are the most important researchers. These are the most important scientists, even if you want to call them Wissenschaftler or something else. But nonetheless,